City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Thank you. Cool. Can I welcome members and officers here at City Hall and the public here in the gallery or watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the GLA Oversight Committee. Please may I remind participants to turn your phones off or put them on silent, and can I also ask members to ensure that any electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Can I ask the clerk, Paul Goodchild, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies for absence from Assembly Member Hall, for whom Assembly Member Bailey is attending today as substitute, and also apologies from Assembly Member Prince.
Brilliant, thanks Paul, and thank you Sean for being here today. Declarations of interest. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members? And can I also ask members if they have any disclosed pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda?
Only in as far as there is a workforce report and we are all part of the workforce chair, which
Yes.
I don't know whether that's declarable, but as it's common to all of us, perhaps we should mention it.
Well, didn't we declare the other day that we all drink Thames water too? So I think we should...
we did, that's true. We did. And indeed, we have the product placement going on during the course of this meeting.
Exactly.
I think we should start sending them invoices for the product placement. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Okay, summary list of actions. I think that I may have an...
I'm so sorry. It's one of those days. Yeah, could I just raise, I've circulated to the committee, at the last meeting of oversight, my colleague Hina Bakari substituted for me, and she raised a question about international trips with the Mayor's Chief of Staff, who sort of challenged some of the information she was questioning, which actually came from a written mayoral question and answer. I've circulated that letter. We literally had through late yesterday a response from the Chief of Staff, and he does say that the written question is inaccurate. I mean, the Deputy Mayor for Business was in India for 2 days. He was already over there, I think, and he took 2 days out of his schedule to attend some work meetings. So the mayoral question was inaccurately drafted, so that will be corrected. But I thought I'd just mention that to put on record, and we can circulate those. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assembly Member Pigeon. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the GLA Oversight Committee?
Noted.
Brilliant. And moving on to today's main item of business, the GLA Workforce Report. We now move on to items from 5. We have a question and answer session with the GLA officers on the GLA Workforce Report and the findings from the Equal Group independent review into experiences of Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. We'd like to welcome our guests here today. We've got Mary Harpley, Chief Officer for the GLA, Shakira Keddo, Assistant Director for People, GLA, thank you. And we've got Tim Steer, who is the Executive Director for Housing and Land. I'm going to take it as read that everybody has read the report and go straight into questions, if that's okay. So Shakira, coming to you first, please. When did the People function first identify the workforce data reporting issues, and what actions have you taken to address those issues?
So we, I suppose, discovered those data issues as the transfer was occurring. So the transfer took place to TfL systems from October 2022. And from that time, we discovered that actually there was various reporting issues, and that actually the data that was required to support us in producing the workforce report was calculated in some ways in different ways, and different kind of calculations that kind of goes from one system to another. We were trying to translate the data to make the data consistent in the way it's presented. From that, though, we realised that also we've put in some kind of, I suppose, a way of understanding and interpreting data better in terms of industry standards and how we should look at the data from the SAP system in comparison to how TfL do that and across the GLA family, so that we've got some consistency in that space. But equally, we need to understand further and better our data and what the data is telling us and how that is presented appropriately and better.
Thanks. And you say this was discovered as it was happening. Why wasn't this something that was foreseen before that occurred?
So we tried our best to mitigate this. I definitely, with my team and working with TfL, we knew the data sets that were required. But from that, since we found out what was happening, we then tried to put in some mitigation since that. So we made the requests personally about the data that we require, the data is needed for reporting, and we put in the mitigation now to understand better what we require now. So we knew the issue was happening. We recognised what we needed, but equally, as the transfer occurred, lots of things were happening in terms of our data, but now it's about kind of rectifying it and making sure that we have the right data now.
So you knew previous to the transfer there was going to be some issues with the data?
I didn't know how much issues there would be. So I didn't know from the offset there would definitely be issues with regards to the data. What I knew was that there might be, so we tried to mitigate that. But as the transfer was happening, we realised that was more around the issues with the data. So I didn't know at the time there'd be the level of issues that I had, but we're putting in mitigations anyway just to make sure that there wouldn't be that case. But as the transfer was happening, I then realised there were, and put in the mitigations to make sure that we had better data.
Okay, and do you want to just delve into those mitigations a little bit more?
So there are performance meeting so that we make sure that actually we have all the information we need with TfL, and to make sure that actually all the data that we have is required. We have regular meetings with TfL around all the services, not just around data, but around all the services and the performance around that. We are in regular dialogue all the time. We have a whole list of the data that is now required for reporting, and we're actually keeping up to date in a regular drumbeat with TfL to make sure that we get what we need from a GLA perspective.
Okay, thank you. Mary, the HR transition took place last year and the reporting period ended 3 months ago. Why are there still issues with the latest workforce report?
Well, I think so. There are a few issues. Most of the data that we need to present to you is here in this report. I think that's the first thing to make clear. The second thing, I think the reason that there are still issues is that the moment of transition was the 30th of October, halfway through the financial year. So in this report, we are drawing data for the first 6 months from the old system and data for the second 6 months through SAP. So that's always going to present a challenge. I think the other thing to recognise is that one of the reasons we made this move for a number of reasons, in the knowledge that we had a number of weaknesses in our previous arrangements, and that included weaknesses in our data. So as we have then asked our colleagues at TfL to provide the data for this report, they have also been flagging alongside issues with the data that they're pulling from the first half of the year and the second half of the year. And Shakira alluded to, just thinking again about some industry standards around data. That's also what we have done. So yes, there is some data still missing. It's not very much. A huge amount of work has gone into getting this collated, as I said, from 2 different systems, one of which, the iTrent system, we knew was far from perfect, which was one of the reasons why we were moving.
Thanks, Mary. The advice is to use different levels of caution in looking at certain elements of the data. Could that level of caution paint an inaccurate picture as we reflect on these figures today?
So I've asked myself that question as we got ready to submit this report. I think that in all the core data sets that are complete here, we can be confident that they are right. And I say that, Chairman, just because of the level of effort and care that I know has gone into the compilation of this data, with some real data experts, both on the TfL side, and we now have a new joiner in the people function dedicated to people data, and he joined mid-April, so he has been able to be a significant contributor to this. So I am content that this is accurate data for me to use, for the organisation, the corporate management team to use, and for you to scrutinise. By the time we get to the next one, which will be for the first 6 months of this financial year, we will have to have ironed out the remaining gaps. If, in doing that, we conclude that there are in fact retrospectively changes we must make to this, we will flag those to you in the 6-monthly report. We'll be very open and transparent about that, if that transpires.
Okay. And so during that ironing out, do you think there are any historical comparisons that we will lose that won't be able to be restored or fixed? Will we simply be able to moving forward with this picture?
I need to ask Shakira that one.
Yeah, sure.
I think I think there is some historical data that we have used, but I think moving forward, we'd like to use like for life for the standards that we're trying to apply now. So it's looking forward into the data that we've got and the integrity of that data, and moving forward to kind of the new standards that we're trying to set.
So you do think there's some historical comparisons we will lose, and we'll just move forward with the new data sets? Okay. Assembly Member Fortune.
Thank you. I think we may have touched on some of these issues already, but there's the cover note to the workforce report talks about the issues around capturing the number of FTEs. It says we've not been able to report with confidence the correct number of posts, and that's because there was a missing field in the FTEs. I mean, it's a pretty fundamental piece of data that we need. So there's been some issue, and I think Mary, you touched on this with the iTrain issue and converting that data over. But I mean, it's the nicest will in the world. That's a fundamental failing. So what's been done to address that? You know, how are we confident that that and other issues have all been ironed out?
So we do present you a figure in this report, even though we say that field wasn't included in the original build, and again, a lot of data has been collected in a manual way to inform that figure. So we haven't just that is a figure that we believe to be right, based on a series of manual checks. And based on our understanding broadly of how in this workforce headcount translates to FTE, because of the part-time working we have and the rest of it. So there are a number of calculations that we can use, plus data that we collected manually from executive directors and others, to inform what we believe to be an extremely accurate estimate. Because we couldn't not do that. And of course the field is now instated.
And that's the key element.
And that's the key.
Okay, right, thank you.
Thanks. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Yeah, I just, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, but did you consider any sort of test runs with subsets of data or double running so that you could identify and fix any issues in advance of this big transfer?
I'm probably best to answer that because Shakira came into some of this quite late. So, as you say, Assembly Member Pigeon, hindsight is a wonderful thing. We certainly didn't do any of that double running. Now, whether we considered it and then decided not to, I don't know, but we didn't do it. I mean, not to go over lots of old ground, because I would like to sort of look forward rather than backwards. As we know, there was huge breadth and depth to this transfer. Yeah. We know it was about payroll. We know it was about recruitment. We know it was about casework. It was also about data. We knew already, and I've said this already today, that our data in the iTrent setup was far from fit for purpose. Mm-hmm. We were very clear that TfL have a infrastructure behind their data that, frankly, we could have only dreamt of before. A sort of combination, I think, of that and us being too busy on the other stuff meant that coming to the data and looking hard at some of those issues was left until at least after Christmas, probably more like February, by which time it's too late to do any parallel running. Yeah. And then we're in a position of pulling the data together. What we were very clear, in fact, what I was very clear with the team, was that I would want to present to you a workforce report that was very familiar to you. So we did have a conversation about, okay, well, maybe we can just do a new workforce report with new cuts of data. And I said, actually, coming out of transition, that is not going to be the right thing to do. Now, we might like a conversation with you all about what the workforce report might look like in the future, because we think it could look different. Some of you may think that too. But I thought that coming out of transition, we needed to land a familiar-looking workforce report with as much of the historical links as possible. And that proved something of a challenge.
Okay.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you. Yeah, right, caveat, okay. What have you done, right, to make sure that to standardize future reports, right, so they are comparable, right, okay, and that what can we expect in the future, okay? So your thoughts on that, please.
A couple of sentences and then ask Shakira to carry it, because actually at the moment, Assembly Member Sahota, we have not designed the next workforce report. We've had our time taken up producing this one, but also I was anxious about suddenly presenting you with a brand new report, because I thought some of you might rightly say, well, hang on, Mary, where are my apples and apples to look at and the rest of it? So that's the first thing. The second thing, we have this new colleague who is a data analyst and a data specialist, now joined us in the people function, and you know, frankly, he is many of the caveats are his, because you know he's the data specialist, and so I think either I'm happy to take a recommendation from you all that Shakira and her team go away and present back to you a new style report next meeting, or I'm happy that Shakira and her team engage with you or some of you in the meantime to have a proper discussion about what type of data this committee would like to see. I'm anxious that we suddenly present something that isn't quite right for you all.
I mean, from our point of view, standardizations and things which we can compare, right, over the progress of time is important to us, and so that standardization and agreement of that standardization would be important, I think.
And I'll just add to that, I think there is something around what is it in terms of data that can be meaningful to us, to tell us a story about what the health of the organisation from a people perspective, right? So I think there is something, I'd welcome a conversation with you all about that, because I think there is different ways we can look at things, and there's different types of data, there's qualitative and quantitative, that will tell us a story about where we are in terms of people and the organisation, which is beyond what's actually in what we're presenting here in the workforce report. So I would like a conversation to input with you to make sure that we have some agreement in terms of what it is you'd like, what it is we can get, and what can give us that indication through a report.
Thank you. And on that point, I just say, obviously, it's not just what we want to see, but I have asked the question of what the staff want to see, and is this report telling a story that they see on their day-to-day? So with that in mind, we have asked staff to feed back into this before we draft our response as well, and I think that part of it is very important. Moving on to establishment, headcount and remuneration, Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. Mary, do you anticipate the overall headcount to continue to grow? And if so, what's the impact of that then on the estate and additional costs in accommodating more staff?
So headcount and establishment has been growing over the last few years, as we all know. I mean, the honest answer is, I'm going to ask Tim to add into this in a minute. The honest answer is, I don't know what's going to happen next, but the reason we have seen this sort of what looks like consistent growth over the last few years is largely driven by new responsibilities asked of us by government, and the need to create posts funded by government. And we've had this conversation before. Most of our growth in recent years has been externally funded. Quite a lot of that has been in Tim's area through the building safety programme.
Yes.
That's brought, I'll ask you to talk to that in a moment. Quite a lot of that's come through the adult education budget programme as well. And so housing and land and community and skills in particular have seen significant growth. We don't often see it coming very far in advance either. But what that will mean for our estate, now, we are managing at the moment with the footprint that we've got. As you know, we keep a very close eye on occupancy. We've presented occupancy figures to this committee before. I was in Union Street yesterday. Union Street was absolutely buzzing. I came across here to City Hall for the afternoon, and City Hall was absolutely buzzing. But at the moment, I feel it's manageable, and where we see pinch points, we as a corporate management team talk about, well, how do we smooth that week out again? Now, if suddenly we were going to hire hundreds of extra people, that would be a different thing altogether. I don't think that's what we're looking at. I think we're looking at potentially a little bit of further incremental growth.
And just finish before we bring Tim in, the additional costs in any case, if it's a role coming from government, as you've described, the on-costs, the government or whoever it is pay for.
The costs are all paid by government, and of course, remember, again, through some pressure from this committee over a period of time, we now have a significant overhead charge for every to cover estate costs, IT costs, to contribute to the costs of other corporate services.
Yes.
And so from a cost point of view, we've removed the risk that we used to sit on there.
Lovely. Tim, did you want to add anything on that, whether you in your area of work, which has been growing, anticipate any growth?
Yeah, no, absolutely, because housing and land is clearly one of the areas. I'm just looking at the figures, 103 people in 2018, 216 people in 2023. It's big growth. As Mary says, I mean, that is virtually all, if not all, externally funded posts. Our core requirement in housing and land is very small and has remained consistent. Building safety is a good example. We had one person 3 or 4 years ago, now it's 55 people. Yes. But it's not just building safety. There are a number of other programmes where the responsibilities and funding and headcount needs have grown around rough sleeping, around specialist housing, around infrastructure funding. It's across the board in many ways, which I feel we ought to see as a sign of success, and the fact that the GLA has been trusted to deliver these programmes on behalf of London. In terms of looking forward, it is quite hard to predict. We are talking to government at the moment about some potential changes to the building safety programme, which may increase our level of decision making. We haven't made a decision on that. That might increase headcount by a further 5 or so in that team. But we'll have to see where we get to in discussion with government. I think there may be other incremental changes of that kind coming up, but I wouldn't have thought there would be the same kind of whole new team situation that we had with building safety 2 3 years ago.
There's nothing obvious on the horizon then. And Mary, do you have a breakdown of the anchor points? How many staff are anchored at the different buildings?
We could definitely provide one. We're clear which teams are anchored where, and the anchor points people have,
so be useful maybe to have
that hasn't changed over time. We've done that stayed remarkably stable over the last 18 months.
And just looking in the detail of the report, there are 46 people now earning over £100,000. 109 people earn more than 80,000. Does that feel the right number of staff to that sort of level? And have you done any benchmarking, or will you consider that as part of the next steps in the sort of modernisation of I don't know what you call it, the whole HR and the whole function, looking at the civil service and other devolved institutions to make sure you've got that balance right and it's not excessive?
So, I mean, that is clearly right at the moment, because then it reflects posts at that level. And, you know, when I see charts like that, I'm always thinking, oh, who's that 46 then? Who's that? And, you know, that's quite easy to think through. As to sort of benchmarking, and I don't know, Shakira, you'll need to come in on that.
So our pay is benchmarked currently, and we will continue to benchmark, particularly as we start to look at various professions and various specialist skills. We do at some point have to pay market rate for some of those roles, and that attracts a certain level as well, particularly what we're looking for. So we continue to do that through my people function in our pay and reward area, just to make sure that actually we're still an attractive organisation, so we can attract people, but actually are we paying the right salary for the right kind of skill set that we require? So we do continue to do that. Through
and do you benchmark with like the civil service and
yes,
others
we do.
To see?
And other public sector organisations.
So I have to say, lots of people I know in the Home Office all say, gosh, come and work at MOPAC, you get paid an awful lot more. So there's obviously a perception we pay far better than others, whether that's reality.
Yeah.
That doesn't include MOPAC, presumably. You're talking about the GLA.
GLA.
Yeah, so MOPAC may be different. Maybe we should pick that up with them. Okay. The Chief Officer Directorate has a much higher proportion of agency workers. What sort of urgent, specific work are they working on at the moment, Mary?
So the Chief Officer's Directorate is essentially two teams. One is Shakira's team, the people function, and we've got this executive support team, which you might remember I put together a couple of years ago. That is, people function is by far the largest of the two. We have been running some agency staff in the executive support team, just to manage vacancies. I imagine, I mean, the year that we're talking about, of course, Shakira, has been the year that we've created the people function. And again, we did speak to the committee about this at the time. We staffed some of the roles in that function with agency and fixed-term staff initially, while we got the proper recruitment process underway. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and as I brought in the people function, we knew we still had to, whilst designing the function, still had to deliver. So that meant that I had to then, whilst I had the established posts, I had to then bring in people into those spaces to be able to at least continue on delivery of the work in order to at least deliver. And then eventually, as we go through permanent recruitment, we then put permanent people into those posts.
Okay, so it's to help with the shift to this new function. Okay, and then in terms of agency staffing, Mary, to what extent do you think we've now reached the appropriate level for agency staffing? We've discussed this over so many years. And are you able to publish sort of historic comparisons of agency figures, work figures, so we can try and monitor trends?
Yes, so I had a long conversation about agency staff with Assemblymember Prince last time, and I did say to him it will be lower in the next report, and I am very pleased to say that it is lower. So we're at 77 now, which is the lowest we've been at for some time. It is one of the trends, one of the historical graphs we have currently lost from the report, because we did used to track that. And so that's one that we'll have to make sure is reinstated. I think I don't think there is the right number. You know, I don't think the right number is 60 or 65 or 70.
Or percentage or anything.
It does ebb and flow for the right reasons. The thing I think I have been most focused on is to make sure that we don't, in effect, have people on agency contracts, in effect, fulfilling permanent positions and doing them permanently, because that's not fair on those people. So we've worked very hard on that. But I suspect, you know, fluctuating between about 55 and 80 is roughly probably where we would be. We did at one point go much higher than that, and that was because we were managing some of the recruitment problems we were having. But you know, we've come back from all of those now, which is partly why this number is back down at a sensible number.
And in terms of temporary staff, we use, I think it's through TfL, Reed as the agency. I have picked up from staff huge issues with their performance, staff being delayed taking up a post because of constant requirements to keep sending the same paperwork. I've had temporary staff without pay for weeks on end. I'm not able to claim pay for 2 months because the agency haven't sent them the right forms to fill in each week. Only getting some of that resolved by escalating it to very senior management in this building. What performance management measures do you have with Reed or with TfL and Reed? And might you be sort of looking at their performance and whether they're the right agency to be delivering our temporary staff?
Yeah, so we are contractually bound to Reed at the moment, and we are aware of some of those issues, but we are trying to manage that contract appropriately so that we don't fall into those issues. And there is also an audit about to take place as well that we're trying to understand some of those issues, what's happening, and kind of dig a bit deeper into some of those areas. So I think there is definitely, I know I've heard some of those stories too, but it's about actually how do we manage that appropriately now and have appropriate contract management with Reed to be able to get the best service. So that is something that the team is definitely working on, and making sure that, you know, agency workers are paid appropriately.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, it's serious. If you've got people going for 2 months without being able to get any pay, that really isn't good enough. So I think you need to review that. What is the audit? Sorry, you said an audit's taking place. Who's carrying that out? What is that, please?
Yep, so we're conducting an audit to make sure that actually the service is appropriate and that actually the contract is working appropriately.
It might be worth you speaking to existing temporary staff to get some real life experience of what's going on, because for some people, unless you've got, as it were, cash in the bank to smooth you out, it's almost impossible to continue. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm sure Assembly Member Prince will be excited to hear that and disappointed he hasn't heard it firsthand. Talking about the estate, I couldn't help thinking, Mary, I'd know a great building where you could get a great buzz and everyone on site together, if you're interested. Anyway. Assemblymember Fortune wants to come in here quickly.
Thank you. Do you know, it's quite near Union Street as well, isn't it? So it'll be easy of... Anyway, Purpose Bill. You know, sometimes agency staff get a bit of a hard time because they are needed to fill certain posts. And so I've got a couple of questions, but starting around that for Tim, how are you doing for planners? How is that in terms of recruiting people?
Planning's not in my area, actually. Okay. It's in good growth, so I can't answer that, I'm afraid.
Well, maybe you can shunt it over to Shakira.
We struggle.
Yeah, okay. Because I wondered, because sometimes when you look at overall agency numbers, actually what you find is it's a particular problem in a particular directorate that's driving that number up. Okay, it'd be interesting to get that number if you could get that to me. In terms of, you know, I had my tongue in my cheek earlier. We've got staff here. We've got staff over at Union Street. Where else do we have GLA specific staff? Are they spread across any other buildings? No, it's just Palestra.
We don't have any GLA staff in Palestra.
No.
Well, GLA transport team staff do spend some time in Palestra.
Oh, okay. They're not anchored there.
They're not anchored there. Okay. They spend some time with TfL colleagues there, and there is some space there with the Deputy Mayor for Transport in Palestra. And equally, the Royal Docks team spends some time with Newham over in the Newham Dockside building down the river, down the dock.
Okay, so there is perhaps a wider footprint than the two buildings we've got. What's the culture like around home working? Is there any specific rules, or are there any directions that people have to stick to?
The GLA?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a very clear policy.
Okay.
Which is that the expectation is that everybody spends at least half the week in one or other of our offices.
Okay, that doesn't have to be the anchored building, it can be...
No, It can be, and in fact we encourage a bit of fluidity between the two.
And again, I have no problem with home working either. I'm just establishing where the facts are. So to finish off on the agency element of it, are all of our agency staff coming through Reed, or are there other agencies? And do we have people outside of IR35 working on independent contracts?
So all of our contractors do come through Reed. We if they are IR35, we make sure that they're registered as IR35 and we manage that appropriately. But we do tend to use Reed as the funnel to make sure that we manage that cleanly.
You mean outside of IR35?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But we do have some staff working along those lines as well. Okay, fabulous. The last one, and I know that my colleague Caroline Pidgeon touched on this, was some of the salaries, and people should, of course, be paid what they deserve. But we talked about benchmarking. It was interesting to see that the Mayor's Office, nearly a third of the people in the Mayor's Office are on £100,000 or more. Who has responsibility for benchmarking those salary figures? Or are they set by the Mayor's Office?
So there are two types of jobs in the Mayor's Office, aren't there? There are the 13 appointments made directly by the Mayor.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that salary level is set.
Yeah.
The remained job, all the other roles, are within our own grading structure and will be evaluated in the same way as all the other jobs.
So they're graded as all other jobs in the GLA?
Yes.
And so is it the fact that it's nearly a third of people in the Mayor's Office, is that the Deputy Mayors then that might be driving that number up, do you think?
The Deputy Mayors will be part of that, yes.
Yeah, so that's probably why the 31% of people in the Mayor's Office are on £100,000 plus.
Yes, Deputy Mayors, Mayoral Directors and other very senior roles in the Mayor's Office.
Okay. Right, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Assembly Member Cooper to finish off this section and take us on to equality, diversity and inclusion after.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a bit about the exit interviews. I'm looking in the report on page 12 and it says staff are invited to complete an exit interview and it's optional, which obviously means that it's not 100%. Although people are encouraged to do so. But it then goes on to say, the move to the shared services model and associated pressures created a temporary pause in exit interviews. From next year onwards, we intend to report full year data through TfL. So I wondered why that transition prevented the conduct of the exit interviews with staff between October 22 and March 23. Could you sort of unpack that a bit?
So, again, whilst we were trying to manage everything kind of transferring over in our transition to TfL, there were some areas whereby we were just trying to make sure that things did go across and requests were put through in terms of things like exit interviews and making sure that those were standardised. In the transfer, though, it didn't happen, and so therefore we have now to put in a new way in terms of a change to be able to start reporting back onto that data again. So what we did do, though, in the meantime of that period is have a workaround of my HR business partners requesting, as soon as somebody had a resignation, to then complete an exit interview. So yes, it wasn't, something that was automatic, but actually it was something that was asked for at the time, as soon as we knew someone was exiting and someone had had a resignation. So whilst there was a gap in terms of the actual system doing it, we then had a manual workaround of then requesting for someone to have an
So to be clear, there were some exit interviews that were conducted during that period?
Yes, we had a workaround, and we still have a workaround in that period.
Okay, so it's not that they all stopped and now they've been reinstated.
No.
That didn't happen. So where you've got the primary reason for leaving the GLA and the secondary reason, looking at the figures that we've got, first of all, what percentage of staff have been doing the exit interviews? Is this a sort of 100% or 50%? What percentage of staff are represented by these figures that I'm looking at? Doesn't say. It just gives me totals of numbers of people in various categories, but it doesn't tell me what the overall number of people are that exited. So I can't tell what percentage that figure is of the total number that left.
No, I'm not sure 100% because I just know that actually it was as people were coming through and as people were kind of requesting it. So I'd need to kind of confirm that figure for you.
Would you be able to?
I will do.
Okay, because obviously it's quite important to know, what percentage I'm looking at.
Yeah.
But looking at those figures, it looks as though the number of people citing the workplace as the secondary reason for leaving the GLA has increased each year since 2020. Obviously that also spans over the pandemic. What issues have you identified from these findings? I mean, is it, do we dig into why people are citing the workplace as an issue? Is it because they don't like hot desking, or what is it about the workplace? And are we taking any action in response to that?
So I haven't actually delved into that reasoning at all. I think because I know that mainly I look at mainly the primary reason, which is obviously people looking for other career moves and that reasoning why. Secondary reason, whilst they cite the workplace, it could be a variety of things, as we know, but in terms of kind of setting out whether it is, kind of around systems or whatever it may be, I haven't delved into that level of detailing of it. As I know, I've been mainly looking at the primary reasons. So due to the primary reasons of people looking at career and career reasoning as to moving on, that's kind of the thing I've been looking at in terms of why that is and what's going on.
With all due respect, I think it's quite important to look at the secondary reasons. So, I could choose some 4 examples of people who have worked at the GLA for a period of time, and their primary reason that they would give for leaving is that they've been offered another job. It might have been a promotional appointment, or, actually it's very good for people to move on after they've been somewhere for perhaps for 5 or 6 years. But the impetus might be the secondary reason that made them feel that they wanted to leave. And certainly I'm aware of 2 or 3 people who, they might give their primary reason as being that they've taken a promotional appointment or something else. But the thing that spurred them to start looking was they were fed up with travelling all the way to E16, or they didn't like having to hot desk or something, or they didn't like the new office altogether. So I think it's really important, don't you, that we actually start to dig into the things that tip people over into wanting to look for other things?
Agree, and I look at either kind of other data sources as well. So, there are things like the staff survey, and we're recently now doing a pulse survey, and those sorts of things to kind of give me a bit more detailing into, before it gets to an exit interview, actually, to look at that data. So I'm looking at kind of things before it gets to that to kind of understand, would that be a reasoning for somebody to leave, and to understand that a bit better. But I personally like looking at different data sets to kind of tell me a story of something. So absolutely, secondary reasons are important, but I'd like to look that in the round of other things as well as kind of the primary reason. So
yes,
everything in the round.
The contents of the staff survey were incredibly illuminating, and I actually thought quite concerning in some areas. Do you collect data to check whether there's any higher turnover amongst specific groups of staff? So is there, more exit interviews with people depending on their heritage, their ethnic backgrounds, disability, age, gender? Is there any? Do we look at that at all?
So I encourage them across all the board. Whether it's someone from a protected characteristic or not. So I don't look at those specifically. Definitely, if I thought that there was a hike in the turnover numbers and that might be from a certain characteristic, absolutely, I would then pinpoint that and encourage, but I encourage it right across the board to kind of tell me the story. But until I kind of see a bit more in terms of the turnover data and understanding that a bit more and kind of looking at a bit more detail, I wouldn't necessarily pinpoint for the exit interviews.
Okay, well, I think that might be helpful to us. And also, do we compare directorates to see if there's any issues about sort of more women leaving? I'm going to pick on Tim because he's here. More women leaving housing and land than leaving good growth or something like that. Do we look at those figures? Does Tim look at those figures? Do you look at those figures? Who would be looking at that?
I mean, what the figures I've got here are the whole directorate figures, and they're interesting. I mean, turnover isn't something that I've personally focused on as yet in my role, and I certainly haven't seen breakdown of turnover by different protected characteristics. It could be an interesting thing to look at. I don't think there's an issue with women leaving specifically in housing and land.
Well, that's encouraging to hear that is the case, and I would hope not. What about the retention figures? Do we presumably look when people are leaving at the sort of length of time that they've been with us? Do we have access to all of that? I mean, I understand there have been some cost-saving exercises and that we may not have full access to the retention figures. Is that definitely the case?
I think listening to this Assembly Member Cooper, we don't currently analyse our leavers data in anything like the level of detail you are asking us at, and so we need to reflect on that. We do check routinely at a sort of higher level to make sure, for example, the percentage of overall leavers, percentage of staff from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic groups as a percentage of overall leavers it feels right and isn't running, massively higher than the overall percentage of that group in the overall staffing body. So we would do a regular check like that, but at anything more of the level that you're talking about, we don't. But as Shakira said, we are looking at the data that we need to give us the best possible picture of what's going on, and we have our new data analyst resource, which who will allow us to do things that we have just not been able to think about doing before in HR. So I think we should add that much more detailed analysis of our levers at the various levels you've been talking about to our thinking about
yes, because we often have conversations about recruitment and retention, and I think one of the issues about retention, if you talk to people about why they're leaving, it can really help you with retention of staff if you address if there's something that starts to emerge. But I just want to move on to looking at the equality, diversity and inclusion area as well, which the Chair mentioned that I would also start asking you some questions on. I mean, obviously, this is something that we have discussed in oversight and I think elsewhere as well. But what do you consider, probably start with Mary, you may want to bring in Shakira as well, the main factors driving the growth in terms of the numbers of staff who are Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff at the GLA, and what lessons are you learning from this increase? Because obviously this is a positive trend that we're seeing.
Well, thank you for recognising that. So, I've got a very simple answer to that, I think, is that we have seen that growth as a direct result of some of the very focused action we promised we would take to make this organisation, that the workforce of this organisation more representative of the city that we serve, and also to make sure that this organisation is a place where people can have a very good experience as an employee, wherever they have come from, whatever their protected characteristic. And I am really pleased. I mean, we saw it, we began to see it coming through the last 6-month report. But again, in here, we can see it coming through in appointments. We can see it still in the pipeline around the recruitment. We can see some significant internal progression of staff from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic backgrounds. We can see representation at our most senior levels growing, finally growing. And we know there's more to come, because we know there's more really, really positive things in the pipeline. So I think my number one lesson from this is, if you really get serious about this and you refuse to be distracted by other stuff, you can make changes like this.
I mean, I think that's good to hear. I mean, obviously, we still are suffering from the snow-capped peak problem of finding that there are larger numbers of Black and Black British staff overrepresented in the lower grades. So that is clearly something that we still need to do more to address the snowy white peaks of the organisation, if I can put it that way. I think increasing the number of black and Asian and ethnic minority staff across the whole organisation has to be a goal. There are clearly some, I don't know why this has happened, but the Assembly appears to have a very low number of people. It's not a very diverse staff who are working for the Assembly. Is there something specific we can do in terms of the recruitment processes that will address both making sure that we don't have people clustered into the lower grades or missing out on being involved in certain parts of the workforce?
So, and having said all of that about, if you really focus on this, you can make things happen. We still have an awful lot to do. So I just wanted to say that and say that I recognise that. We are doing all sorts of stuff. I was going to ask Tim to speak very briefly, perhaps, on what we're doing in the Resources Directorate, where we have an awful lot of black staff in particular at very low grades. And then perhaps, Shakira, you could talk a little bit about some of the focused work you're doing with individual directorates on recruitment. Perhaps, and I know you're working with Helen as well on the Assembly side.
Yes, so there's a very specific bit of work which I've been leading along with colleagues in the Facility and Resources team to look at a specific cadre of staff, particularly in the security guard team, where there's a much higher concentration of black members of staff, particularly than we would expect and we would see elsewhere in the organisation. So I think we were both keen to understand what was going on there, but also support staff in that team, particularly around development and opening up of opportunities more broadly within the GLA. So a team of us did a fairly significant bit of work working with a consultant around coaching for those members of staff and looking at career planning and skills development. And we had a significant number of people expressing interest in that and going through that programme. And I haven't been so close to it recently, but I believe there have been some real success stories from that and people moving to other parts of the GLA group or into other roles in other organisations too. So, but it was a major focus area.
Yeah, and so myself and my team have been going and speaking to directorates directly to look at what we can do about attraction, how do we sell the GLA, and what are the kind of hallmarks we can sell out across kind of wider markets, that people understand the work that we do here, and that is yielding some really good results as well. And as Mary says, I am working with Helen to be able to do the same thing with the Assembly Directorate. So I do believe there's some good things to come soon because we are putting in some targeted work around that.
Oh, okay, so some targets will be established. Are we also giving support to, it was really interesting, the example that Tim just gave, are we giving support to managers where we have identified areas of good practice and giving managers the time and space where they're not necessarily displaying that to begin with, to develop the good habits of really sort of coaching and encouraging staff to apply for promotional and additional roles? Because I mean, we just referred to the staff survey, and obviously there were some results in there that were really quite shocking in terms of people's unwillingness to trust their managers was the particular area that sort of stuck out for me. So obviously there is some work there that needs to be done in terms of really supporting staff, but you do need to have managers who are able to really deliver that. Are we able to do that?
Well, able to deliver and committed to deliver. I mean, I would just, Shakira will have some other examples, but as you know from before, one of the things that I have been doing is very explicitly holding my senior team to account for delivering progress, and that has included some very focused sessions on, for example, the question: to what extent does, as he's here, we'll use Tim as an example, to what extent does the senior team of housing and land, what extent do they know their black, Asian and minority ethnic staff in the directorate? To what extent do they understand what those staff members' aspirations are? And to what extent are they having those people in mind when when we're looking for people to sort of put themselves forward, make expressions of interest for jobs. So that has been a very explicit challenge to every executive director. And the next challenge round is going to say that, pose that same challenge for our disabled staff, because we're running these two parallel priorities.
Well, I'm not asking about that, but I believe there are others who might.
Okay, I'll leave that one for later.
But and really very soon. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry, Tim, for picking on you like this. You may never come back, of course. Thank you, Chair.
I'm worried about staff.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask quickly about the changes in reporting from this year from the previous report, and to what extent, in relation to Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, and to what extent you're satisfied with the new approach, because obviously it's seen that go down from 32% to 31%.
So this is the move to the so as part of the shared services move. We focus on some of the issues that have come out of that move, but one of the things, of course, that we learnt was how Transport for London do some of this, and how the measures that they use, the rest of it, and they use the industry standard measure, which is to report the percentage of everyone who is declared, as opposed to report a percentage of everybody, including people who have declared nothing, and their record, their declaration is utterly blank. As we say throughout this report, we've got some pretty high declaration rates now, 80%, bordering 80%. We've worked hard on declaration, and we will continue to do so. And so this shift that we have made now to be in complete line with industry standards, and indeed with TfL and the rest of the group, is to report percentages of people who have declared, which does in hindsight feel rather more sensible. It hasn't actually made a major difference to our numbers at all, because our numbers have been growing for other reasons. Anyway, they've been growing because of the work that we've been doing. So again, your question, Chairman, I think was about to what extent are we confident in that data. Again, I just repeat what I said before. I am privy to the time and the consideration and the integrity that's been brought to that data, and I'm sure that it is the right data. You can imagine I was particularly demanding on the integrity of data in areas such as representation.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. And so, yes, I'm going to come in a couple of matters about disabled staff. Firstly, returning to the issue of the disability pay gap that Mary mentioned. Shakira, could you let us know what have been the main drivers for the closing of the GLA's disability pay gap, and what learning can you apply to other pay gaps areas?
So I think it's about... I suppose there's something around understanding from our disabled colleagues. We've done a lot of work in terms of working with the Disability Network and kind of holding and understanding kind of what were perceived barriers. I think there is something around support, around people getting promotions, but actually when you kind of started to look at some of the kind of challenges that our disabled colleagues were facing, it was around perceptions, around some of what they believe people thought was their disability. So we've done a lot of work in trying to breaking that down. We've done a lot of sessions around upskilling our managers around some of this stuff. We've done a lot of kind of just wide awareness across the GLA. At one of our staff senior manager conferences, we've had different people come and talk and really just elevate and understand and share knowledge in this area, and I believe that has yielded some results, but not enough, as we know, as we can see. But there is definitely a laser focus right across the organisation around building awareness mainly, but also providing opportunity where people didn't feel there was an opportunity before.
Thank you. I'm just digging into the numbers because, I mean, obviously people have talked about issues with the data, but obviously with disabled people that's even more difficult because, of course, people's characteristics around disability change much more often than any other protected characteristics. So just to check, you've got, is it 87% of staff have declared whether they're disabled or not? Because it says ethnicity, I assume it's typo. That's fine. It did confuse me. But then, you know, you've only got, that's actually only sort of, then we're only 9% proportion of staff overall are disabled, and then compared to 17 of the working age population, and we know that actually the working age population is far lower than the general population because of the barriers for disabled people to get into work. But I sort of want to concentrate on that declaration because I don't want to say anything about that proportion without us being confident about that. How recent are those declarations that you have, bearing in mind that people's status might change there? And how, I know you've done some work to encourage staff to declare, but do you believe that's gone up due to more people letting you know and letting you know where things have changed, or whether you're just getting people as they come in the door? Does that make sense? Sorry, that was a very long point.
So I think at the core of the question is, are we confident that people are updating their declarations as their conditions change?
Yes. Yeah. And well, yeah. Go for that.
And I guess we hope people will do that. We do every so often have quite a big push on declarations, as a result of which I updated mine not that long ago. But we do rely on people to do it. Yeah. And also, of course, it's true, isn't it, that even in the we know 87% of us have made a declaration on disability. Doesn't mean to say everybody with a disability has declared that.
Absolutely not. So
I think that must be going on in here, mustn't it, as well? Because I think that's what you're pushing at, isn't it? 87% is a really high declaration rate. Why is our disability rate still only at 9?
Well, perhaps I don't want to read anything in, but there are many reasons why that might be underreported. Yes. Whether people don't feel comfortable in declaring, it would be concerning if they weren't telling the truth, and also just awareness of it and changes and everything like that. So do you think there's more you can do to get a more accurate picture? Because it is a low figure, and to be honest, we should be looking at higher. I think we should be looking at higher than the working age population, the proportion of disabled people. It should be a welcoming place for disabled people to come and work.
So myself and my team have also done a push at recruitment stage as well, so that as people are coming in, we've reworded questions that were already kind of worded but didn't quite make sense, or people felt uncomfortable to answer, so we could catch people as they come through the door to be able to declare as well. So we're trying kind of different kind of methods to make sure that we do kind of get the declarations right, but also that people feel comfortable as they come into the organisation and feeling this is a place where they can declare whether they have a disability or not. But it is something that we know that we need to still do some work on, but trying different methods to make sure we capture it.
Do you have information on how old all those declarations are? In this particularly?
Because don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. Okay. That would be interesting.
It'd be worth looking at too, wouldn't it? Because then again, we've got some data, haven't we, to push harder for some updates.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Just to continue on that quickly, how many disabled parking bays are there for staff here?
2 or 3. It's the number we must have.
I think it's
They're just out the back.
I think it's 2, and that's obviously inclusive of visitors as well. Do you think that is a good offer in terms of making it attractive for people to come here?
I don't know. I've not heard it raised once by the Disabled Network, and I'm the executive sponsor for that. So there are lots of things that our colleagues in our Disabled Staff Network want us to do better. I've never heard a reference to the disabled parking, so that's just thinking aloud really in terms of in terms of that. There are some adjustments, aren't there, in terms of travel to work? Perhaps you'd want to talk about those, which probably remove the need for the space. I don't know.
Yeah, so my team support the organisation in managing workplace adjustments, and if that came through as an adjustment, I'm absolutely sure that we would, look to kind of expand that if that was an actual absolute requirement for somebody to come and attend work. But we do a lot of, we look at adjustments across the piece and look at kind of how people come to work and whether there's further adjustments required outside of driving in and parking. So we look at that across the range, and if that was a requirement, absolutely we'd note that.
Okay, good, because I held an event and it was a big issue for the event. But Mary, you mentioned there were other things that had been raised. What sort of adjustments are those that people have? You said there were other things that people have been more focused on. What are those?
So we're running workplace adjustments. We've talked about those here before as well, and we've done a lot of work to make sure that when people join, when people change teams, people are asked about their whether or not they need any adjustments to be able to do their job to the sort of full. And we have had some issues over a period of time with people who then explain they need an adjustment, getting that adjustment in place. But we've got a team now in Shakira's area focused on making sure that workplace adjustments are not only understood but are then delivered, and are delivered in fairly short order. I mean, some of them are very straightforward, like a particular chair, for example. Some are a bit more complicated because they're to do with particular software that we may not actually have or know how to support until we get it in. Other people have quite a complex set, and what we're trying to do now, in my commitment to the disabled group has been that we will accelerate the speed at which those the workplace adjustments are put in place. Which is why I was pretty sure we hadn't heard about the parking one, because we are focused on a range of workplace adjustments. But I mean, we're running a running total now. Every fortnight we have a look at what are the adjustments in train, where do they appear to have got stuck, what are we doing to release whatever the problem is.
But there's no kind of big problems with the building or issues that are being raised consistently about things that should change or that look like barriers. Because I think sometimes the issue is, it's all well and good putting your workplace adjustments in once you've come to a job and had it. But this is a public building people might visit, and if you think, well, that doesn't look very welcoming, you may never put an application in. But there's nothing like that you think would put people off.
Not here in City Hall. We've got one access issue we are still grappling with in Union Street.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. So, yes, back into equality, diversity and inclusion, looking at gender. And Shakira, in most directorates, there are more women than men. It's running at about 62%, which seems very marvellous. So just wondering, why is this the case? Is it a problem, and are you doing anything to address it?
Or is it the way it should be?
Oh, gosh. I think there is something around having balance. And I think there is something around people making kind of, looking at recruitment as a starter and looking at actually how is a team comprised. But equally, there is also something about our organisation that does draw women here because we've got quite a lot of family-friendly policies. So I think there's something about a balance. Is it a problem? I think there's always something about, how we make sure that the balance is maintained, because I think that's really, really important, as I said. But it's something that we have to keep a watchful eye on, I think, particularly if we kind of tip too far in one direction. So I think we need to just keep a watchful eye, keep people kind of making sure that their teams are always kind of in a balanced space and place, right across the organisation, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, I really welcome the statement in the report about gender not being binary. And sort of recognising that there will be some people who don't identify either as man or woman, they'll be in some kind of gender diverse space. And I just wonder, sort of, I understand why you don't report the numbers if the numbers are small, because of protecting people's identities. But is there a percentage that you might get to that you would then feel that you could report, or is there any way of sort of giving because we have very we have good policies around gender and understanding that gender may not be binary, and so I just wonder, sort of, is there a kind of percentage at which point you might feel able to report, or is there any way that you can give an indication of whether the numbers are stable or gently increasing or decreasing, or just so that we can broadly keep track without breaching anyone's confidentiality?
Yeah, so for me, as you said, confidentiality is really key here. I think that's something that I would have to take away and speak with the person that's in my team now for data analytics to kind of figure out actually what would be an appropriate number to report without removing that confidentiality. So I'll take that away and ask the question.
Yeah, just I don't know whether in other workplaces there's good practice that that we could copy, but it just sort of seems like if we're a workplace that is inclusive, then kind of some kind of reporting, and I do recognise this little statement in the report is definitely a positive step, but that just might make this feel like even more like an inclusive workplace. So my next question is for Mary, which is about the Resources Directorate, where women are, it's the one directorate where women are underrepresented. So yes, for resources, it's kind of, it's in the upper 30%, so it's well below 50%. And I just wondered if you've got any insight into why that's the case, and any initiatives that you're pursuing to increase the representation of women in that directorate.
So, you're right, they do, that directorate stands out. So I think there are a couple of reasons for it in the profile. So the first is of course, this includes facilities management. And, we know from our own experience that not all, but most of our security staff and not all, but most of our porters and other staff are male staff. And in fact, as we've already said, predominantly black male staff. We're hoping that some of that work that Tim has described, when we have seen people get new jobs elsewhere, that will open up vacancies in that team. Whether we see more women coming into those types of roles, we'll see, although we have some already, and they're very good at those roles. So for some reason, we've ended up in a highly male profile in that team, and it's quite a big team between them. Security and porterage is quite a big team between them. The other main part of the team, of course, is finance and IT. This is all in resources. Again, perhaps traditionally more male-led professions. Particularly in finance, though, I think we're seeing that changing. We've brought in a set of new finance business partners, and at least 3 of them are women. So we've got some women coming in at the senior level in the finance team. But probably, again, our IT team is probably, again, where we see very few women, not none, but very few. So I think part of this is that those are still areas of work that have been traditionally been very male dominated, and in other places still remain quite male dominated. So I think part of this is about, you know, making sure that as the profile of those younger people coming into those professions changes, we make sure we get our very good share of them, and also that, you know, we make it clear that that you can be very successful as a woman in those professions here in the GLA. But that will come back to some of the recruitment.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So I think in some of those professions, they are, in industry anyway, quite male dominated. But I think as we kind of move through looking at kind of, again, you know, back to what I was saying before, what the GLA is, how we operate kind of in the wider context of the public sector, and where we are in terms of some of those industries and how we kind of stack up against that, that will change, I think, the demographic in those spaces. But I think it will take some focused work for us to do to get there.
Yep, thank you. So my final question is about the diversity of the GLA's senior staff, and the graph in the pack is really very positive, going up on both disability, on whether people are black, Asian and minority ethnic, and also going back up on whether people are women or men, and more women. So I just wonder, what do you think is impacting that increase in diversity within the GLA's senior staff? Mary, you said earlier that you just have to get on and do it. Yeah. Is that the answer?
It's the same answer. You know, we have been absolutely focusing on this, and we have been focusing in particular, at the senior level, on grade 10 and above, actually, although this measure is grade 12 and above. We've seen a lot of really good external recruitment in at that level. We've seen some really good internal progression at that level. It's changing the look and feel of that senior group. I mean, literally changing it, isn't it? And it's all about the focus that we've had. You know, you remember we said that people weren't able to make appointments at this level without justifying that appointment to their executive director. We've insisted on diverse recruitment panels. We haven't quite got there at 100%, but it's making a difference. I think all of these things are coming together, but I know Tim wants to come in too.
It was just a brief point really to say, you know, it's really hard to overstate the level of focus there has been on creating a more inclusive workplace, and the breadth of the measures that we've looked at has really been, you know, it's covered everything from the recruitment to progression to culture, and we're trying to think of it in a really holistic way. And I would just say I think this has been noticed within the organisation, but also I've had a couple of instances recently where I've been interviewing people and they've proactively said, I've heard about what the GLA is doing. You know, this is a place where I want to come and work, because it feels like it's really making efforts and taking this agenda very, very seriously.
That's very encouraging. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I want to ask quickly about the data we've got here for faith and sexual orientation within the GLA staff. There's no comparison with previous years or with London's working age population for either. Is that something that we could have going forward?
Yes.
Thank you. And I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the additional EDI budget investments for future years, and if there's anything as achievement-wise we should be looking out specifically, or projects that we should look out for specifically.
So I think the one that we haven't really spoken about today at all is some of our plans around learning and development. And
we are going to.
You're going to move on to that.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the one I would.
Okay.
I would just add that we have now put in project officers into each directorate from the centralised EDI budget. So actually, whereby we had some narrative around kind of some directorates kind of feeling the pressure to deliver their EDI plans and all that sort of stuff, we now have some kind of really core resource put in to be able to kind of galvanise those plans so that we can understand and support in a better way to understand where the barriers are, what we need to do more, and have kind of a holistic plan across the organisation around where we are in terms of EDI and what are there kind of core blockages across the piece, or is it just a certain directorate, to be able to have some of that intel a bit better than kind of just reading it off a plan, but actually hearing that intel from people that we know are in there to be able to support the agenda. So I would say that would be one of our best investments.
Thank you. And if by magic, we will move on to recruitment, learning and development, and I'll pass over to Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, panel. If I could start with Shakira, please. What are the main reasons for the significant increase in the proportion of internal appointments from non-white ethnic minority backgrounds?
So I think what we do now in terms of good practice is now make sure that all our posts are open right across the organisation internally first, to be able to provide kind of different skill sets moving across the organisation. And then, as we said, we've kind of got quite a laser focus around Black and Asian ethnic minority appointments and those sorts of things. So we're making sure that actually the internal appointments process works appropriately, and it's probably working better than it has done before. So we're just making sure that actually the process is working appropriately right across the piece.
Do you have any sort of verifiable evidence about what's driven this uplift in BAME appointments, and applications? Is there something you've done significantly different? Is it just that? Is it amongst the staff? Are they just saying, look, people are trying to help, let's respond? Do you have any verifiable evidence as to why this change has come about?
And there's a couple of things for me. Number one, the opportunity is transparent. So that's a good thing, that people can see where opportunities are now. I think we have done a lot of work around mentoring and getting people to have the confidence to be able to apply where they thought they didn't have a chance before. So that is definitely something that we're seeing an output of. But also, I just think that where we know we are focused, people are beginning to kind of respond to all the things that the organisation is doing around this agenda. So I think that there's a couple of things that are going on, not that we are doing, but actually that our employees are responding to at the same time to create that.
You've had this increase in sort of internal applications, but are you seeing the same increase in external applications?
So we have done a lot of work again to drive our opportunities, but actually place them on specialist boards, so that actually there is kind of a bit more profile in our roles in certain areas and certain boards, to be able to showcase our roles in those different kind of areas. So I do think there is an uptake in terms of the number of different types of people applying, but definitely as it comes through from attraction right the way through the process, as we've now got kind of steps in place in the process to be able to verify those applications and appointments, that also has, as we've seen in the data, an output and a better output in terms of BAME appointments.
Okay. Why has there been a decrease in the proportion of external candidates appointed from non-white ethnic minority backgrounds, despite the proportion of applications and shortlisting increasing?
So again, I think there is something around us making sure that people understand the process. So there is something around how do we make sure that the actual process flows through and people do understand which is what is required, because we've realised that actually, you know, we looked at, for example, our competency framework as an example, and we have done so much work now to look at that, rectify that, because it was just very wordy. People were putting kind of lots of different competencies, so people were kind of deselecting themselves in some areas because they didn't think they'd make it through the process. So we've done a lot of work around that to make sure that actually we're consistent in our approach, because in some areas they weren't adopting quite the right processes. But I do think that also we just need to make sure that the rigour remains around looking at shortlists, looking at our panels, making sure that they are all diverse, and making sure that actually all the things that we are set out to do as an organisation, that runs through the organisation, to make sure that we then do have the appointments at the end.
Maybe this is directed at Mary, my next inquiry. Across the GLA group, we have vacancies. There seems to be, if you're a member, certainly there seems to be some areas that we struggle to fill the posts, to provide the service to the wider GLA. Is this as a result of some of the changes we're seeing now, or is it something else more fundamental?
Sorry, Assembly Member, across the GLA or the GLA group?
The group. So, for instance, we have conversations about having rapporteurships, and people always say we don't have the capacity to do it, etc., etc. And to us, it's always delivered as, you know, there isn't the staff there, etc. The capacity isn't there. Is that a result of the changes that have been made in recruitment practices, or is it something else?
I think it depends. It depends on the particular example, I think. Mm-hmm. So certainly in terms of the Assembly Secretariat, as we know, been going through a period. In fact, we didn't talk about it, but the Assembly headcount looks quite low in some of these earlier charts. But that was because there was a period where actually we're running a lot of vacancies in the Assembly Secretariat. Those are increasingly now being filled, and then we've got turnover of 11%, which is a reasonable turnover level to have, but of course it does mean that people leave. I don't think... we've had some recruitment delays, but not everywhere. So I think I'd probably have to... There's probably a particular set of circumstances for every example. It's hard to generalise, I think.
Okay. And I suppose, just to go back to Shakira, so it sounds to me that you're happy about the change that you've made and the impact it's having on the diversity of your staff, certainly internally. Is there something that you'll be doing externally to make sure that pipeline continues, to make sure that you get new people in of all shades, races, colours, sexualities, etc., but to keep that going, particularly if you look at black staff, for want of a better term, that seems to be fuelled by internal applications. At some point, that capacity will go. What are you doing to get new people in the door?
Yeah, there's definitely something around our attraction piece, which we are spending some time on looking at. And GLA is an organisation, an employer of choice from a diversity perspective. So there's still some more work to do there to generate kind of the connections and generate, even across the GLA family, actually, people that we can start to interchange talent, and really looking at actually how do we describe our roles that make sense to kind of other industries and various things. So there's still lots more to do. And then tapping into those certain markets, I think there's more we can do in that space. So absolutely the work isn't done there at all, but we're just beginning, I think, to kind of really see. And where I've now got my team in place, which look at strategic resourcing, they look at work, they'll be starting to look at workforce and workforce planning and characteristics of direct. We can look at all those sorts of things now that we'll have some capacity to be able to do that in a very different way than we have before.
And all these changes you've made, how are they perceived by your white staff? Are they seen as a levelling of the playing field, or are they seen as a disadvantage against them? How are they perceived, and where do you get the feedback for that? But either anybody on the panel? Yeah.
Well, there's a good question about whether we ask directly for feedback. So I think we have a lot of white staff who absolutely welcome all this work. we probably have a few who feel threatened and disadvantaged by it. I think those are absolutely in the minority, and I've been clear that if you find yourself in this organisation with a set of values and a set of aspirations around inclusivity that you don't like, then it's the wrong place for you. And I say that even at induction sessions when people have arrived. So, there will be, won't there? There will be some people who will see it as threatening. There may be one or two who wish we weren't focusing on it. But I think I can say, Assembly Member Bailey, that the majority of white staff here are wholly supportive of what we're doing. That would be my view. Now, I don't. That's anecdotal because we haven't asked. And maybe we should do more to understand that. We have got this inclusion survey just launched this week, which might help us understand that question. If it doesn't, we might look at developing those questions in the future. But that's what I would say to you on that. I don't know, Tim, if you've got a different view.
No, not a different view at all. I think this isn't just something which is happening right now. The Equal Group report, which was published, a couple of years ago, was a real watershed moment, I think, for the organisation. That report recognised that there were structural barriers for some members of staff, some groups of staff in the organisation, and that's quite an important thing for the organisation. It's from where a lot of this work has flowed, and I've never had an experience where a member of staff has questioned that conclusion. Despite the fact I think there are avenues for people to do that if they wanted to. We try really hard to create ways of people feeding in views, whoever they are. So I've never heard a challenge to the Equal Group report findings, and equally I've never heard a kind of sustained challenge to the measures that we're taking either.
But thank you for that. And I suppose to Shakira, do you feel that you need to monitor it? Because as your policies become more and more successful, this may, I hope not, but may become more of an issue.
I'd also say, though, we've got there is a lot of allyship in this organisation.
Interesting.
We have an all-in network, which is fairly new, right? All-in network, which is about allyship. So I think sometimes in collecting certain areas of data could become quite divisive, and we wouldn't want that for the organisation. I wouldn't want to be in that place, actually, given we've done so much work to improve the environment and the culture. But I think there is something around, if, as Mary says, and she makes it super clear, if this isn't your agenda at all, then this isn't an organisation for you. But I think there is something more about people learning and understanding different experiences that I've more encountered here than anything else. But definitely there's a lot of allyship, and we have a whole network now for allies to be able to understand and support the agenda than be against it. So.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And over to Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Just returning to issues of disabled staff and disabled candidates. The report acknowledges the GLA needs to do more to attract disabled candidates. What work is in train to address this issue?
So again, similar to ethnicity, really, we're trying to really look at the appropriate job boards. We're doing a lot around with our disability network to understand how would we be an employer of choice. But again, I think we need to there's lots of things, I think, particularly in this space around word of mouth, and how do we kind of strengthen our positioning in that space. So I think there is still a lot more work to do, but we also need to kind of figure out which methods work best and how do we kind of refine that, which I'm still working through. We haven't I know I haven't got there yet. So I think there is still more to do, still kind of where do we put our jobs so that actually they're noticeable and we are attractive? And how do we sell the attraction to people who do classify themselves as disabled, but actually they would want to come here as an employer of choice?
Thank you.
Could I just add, sorry. Could I possibly just add one point? I think there's a really interesting and important kind of strategic conversation about the attractiveness of the GLA to disabled candidates and potentially the ability of disabled staff to progress in the organisation, which is around the intersection of hybrid working, part-time working, flexible working, and all those issues which could be really important in this space, and not just for disabled staff, for other staff too, you know, women and others with caring responsibilities. So I think particularly as we continue to refine our kind of hybrid working thinking as we come out of lockdown, this is going to open up some opportunities for us, and we should be ensuring that we're a real best practice employer in that regard.
I agree, but I think it's very important not to make assumptions, because people's impairments vary hugely. So assuming that disabled candidates would prefer hybrid working is not really wise, to be honest. We need to listen rather than make assumptions. And related to that, just asking about workplace adjustment passports. You say that they've been introduced and they work here. I am very rusty on how these have been implemented, but so that then allows staff to take that through all parts of the GLA. Can those passports then be taken to other bits of the GLA family? And would you consider valid, say, from other parts of maybe the civil service, or are we not at that stage yet? Because that would, of course, make it so, you know, that not having to renegotiate effectively if you move organisation in effectively the same industry.
Well, as you say, we're not there yet. It's a really interesting development. I mean, the obvious next step would be within the group, wouldn't it? Yeah. And you know, we should add that to our list.
I expect that list is very long.
It is.
I think that would be. I think it would be a useful thing to look at.
Yes, but you know, as I've hinted at already, the fact that we now have a shared HR sort of a service with TfL has brought home some of the things that we do differently to them, and some things that they do, and actually we've learned good things from each other over the last 6 months. So this is another one to take into that joint conversation.
Thanks. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Just want to check on page 34 of the report. It states the GLA is still using Havas or Havas. The company brought in last year to do the recruitment to clear the backlog. Was this not supposed to be a temporary measure?
Yes, however, we realised that actually once we switched onto the TfL platform, that there are some areas that are still up for negotiation that they service for us and some that they don't. So in order for us to continue on having service, we needed to make sure that the system was still, the service was still running, and therefore the usage of Havas. But we are now negotiating with TfL to make sure that all the services are encompassed as part of the platform.
Should that not have been done up front, though, with the transition to TfL, to get that in the contract, to have those provisions?
So yes, that would have been much better, but I think some of the recruitment that we do is not what TfL would consider to be standard recruitment. So yes, they were going to take on our recruitment. We were going to pass that over. That's all fine. And then you get to the matter of we recruit. Of course, we run the recruitment on behalf of the mayor for a number of mayoral boards, for example. That isn't bog standard staffing recruitment in sort of in the TfL world. I think that's one of the examples, isn't it? Right. That's one of the areas where we're still using Havas, and it was, you know, it's the fine detail of actually, you know, in what we call recruitment, and 95% of which is absolutely standard recruitment as you recognise it, TfL. We've got this little bit on the end here, and they're saying to us, oh, we don't do that stuff. We don't do that. So the best thing to do was to keep Havas on temporarily, to keep those streams of recruitment going. And as then Shakira said, once everything else was passed across, then come back to that and get that slotted in. So that's what we're doing. But it's not just, I can see in hindsight, without that being explicitly spelled out somewhere, and the GLA team were thinking, oh, well, this is just standard, we always do this, but actually it receives on the other end, and TfL are saying, oh, what's this bit here? We don't do this bit. So it's those little bits that we're still having Havas do. With more time and more run up and all the rest of it, some of this stuff probably could have been ironed out before, but we're doing that now.
Okay, so the contract's been renewed for how long?
So I think it's now been renewed until the end of the year so that we can do the transition and make sure that actually all the stuff has been landed and that we can then let that go.
Thanks. And do you know the cost of that?
Not currently off the top of my head, no.
Could you let the committee know? Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. So I want to touch on the bit of the recruitment that relates to us moving here, the agreement with Newham Council to make jobs available to Newham residents as we go out to recruit. And I just wonder, Mary, probably, has there been an increase in the proportion of Newham residents recruited to the GLA in the last 6 months? Or maybe that's for Shakira, I don't know. Which of you would?
Shakira has got the exact numbers, if that's okay to ask her to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the financial year, we've received 481 applications from Newham residents, but it wasn't via Newham Works. We realised that actually this proportion was quite small from Newham Works, and therefore we actually received more from our GLA website, actually. So we're making sure that actually we can now capture kind of postcode to understand where the applications are coming from. Is it from Newham? But we realised that the proportion from Newham Works was really, really small in comparison to when people came to our GLA website.
Okay, so you've had 481 applications. How many of those actually turned into recruitment?
30.
30.
Yeah. So in the year that we are reporting on, we from all our analysis think we have brought in 31 members of staff with Newham home addresses. One of those through the scheme related to the planning condition. And we've got one member of staff who came through that scheme, which is the Newham Work scheme. But as we've reflected before, moving here is likely to have made working here more attractive to people living on the east of London. And so we've seen a further 30 appointments. So 31 in total.
Okay, and just in terms of reporting, I think I saw in the report that you were going to be providing a quarterly monitoring report to Newham, but that's been changed to an annual report. So when does that annual report to Newham get made? So that because we presumably need to just keep track of that year on year.
Imminently is the answer. It's been drafted. I've seen the draft, so it's imminent.
Okay, thank you very much. And well, that's hope Newham are happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come over to Assembly Member Fortune?
Thank you. Just to follow up on what Caroline Russell was asking, and tying back into what we were talking about with salary and brackets. So mean salary at the GLA is 59 grand. Of those 31 recruited from Newham, do we know what the spread is across those salary brackets?
No. We could find out, but that's not. We're not asked to report on that. So.
I was just wondering if we were monitoring. So we're recruiting people. That's great. What are we recruiting people to do? That would be quite interesting, I think, maybe for some feedback at another time. Cool. All right. Learning and development, L&D. We've transferred over to this new HR shared service scheme. So I was wondering if we've been able to share some of the L&D courses that perhaps TfL staff have with our GLA staff?
So we are still kind of, well, we've got our own offering as well that's still kind of going, but we're also trying to deliver kind of the basic, I suppose, mandatory courses to make sure that actually we are kind of legally compliant and all those sorts of things. So we are definitely still delivering kind of the same learning offer that we had before, but equally just through the TfL platforming. But equally, there are other things that we are trying to do around kind of career development and support. We've got more around kind of looking, I suppose, more focused around directories around specific technical areas that are required for development. But equally, we're making sure that actually we're having the basics covered around definitely induction and definitely around kind of the mandatory things that are required for people to do their roles.
So we've got the mandatory courses like unconscious bias and all those things, which I'll come to in a second. But my understanding was there are courses that are available to TfL staff that hadn't previously been available to our staff. Now we're on a shared system. Do they have access to that? And then also, because we've shifted over from one system to another system, have historical training records transferred across? And how easy is it for managers to monitor and keep up to date with everything that's gone on?
Yep, so we have transferred those records so that people can still kind of monitor and manage and make sure that actually they can keep their kind of continuous professional development still going. We do still have access to kind of all of the kind of the kind of options that TfL give to us, and we're making sure that that's actually then combined with our own learning offer as well. So all of those kind of courses that TfL have, we do have access to, but equally we still have the things that we still had, like our career coach and all those other kind of important things that we still have, that we had here, are still an option for us too.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, all of the courses that were completed on the old system can be seen on the new system. Okay. There are, having a look at the mandatory courses that you were talking about, I think there's over 20 courses that are mandatory for staff to complete, which is quite a struggle. It's quite a struggle. What support is given to managers, both, well, primarily, I suppose, through technology, to make sure that these courses are being completed, that there's nudges, that flags are raised, etc., if courses haven't been completed on time?
Yep, so as part of the system, managers do get nudges. Actually, employees get nudges, because we are making sure that actually employees do take control and are responsible for their development and learning, but also we're making sure that actually we can see the data around that as well, to make sure that actually people have completed what they should be completing. We actually now we've refreshed our induction package so that actually everything that is required and mandatory is coming as part of that, so that we can catch people as they come through the door, and then it kind of doesn't drift off as they kind of go through the organisation and start their roles. So we're trying to capture as much as that as part of onboarding, and individuals coming on board to make sure that they have that time set from the offset, so that it minimises people not completing that.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had it. We've all had these when we've been managing staff, had emails coming in saying so and so hasn't completed the fire training, etc. Is that? Do you know if that's monitored in regular one-to-ones or team meetings? At what level of the organisation, or how high up the organisation, does monitoring of the completion of training courses go? Mary, will that land on your desk? Sort of completion rates, etc.
For some courses, yes.
The mandatory courses?
For some of the mandatory ones, yes. Not the whole package.
Okay.
Although the other point I was going to make was that this, as you reflect, Assembly Member Fortune, it's a very long list. Yeah. And it's sort of grown up over time. I'm probably partly responsible. I don't think there was a mandatory course before I arrived. Yeah. No course was mandatory. Then I made a few mandatory, and then others jumped on the bandwagon, I think, is what happened. So we are also, we're keeping those going, as Shakira said, because we must. But we're also having a bit of a rethink about what is mandatory for who and when. Yeah. So including, of course, that really important probation time. what would we expect people to complete in their probation period. Not only the technical courses, but some of the ones related to our values and aspirations around EDI. And then, you know, but if you're a manager, what do you need to do? So we're thinking about that rather more smartly now. That's not in place yet, but that's coming.
Okay. I think that's encouraging that that's being reflected upon, because 20 plus courses is, I would say it's bordering on unmanageable. Do you know what the directorate completion rates are like now? I think we asked you about this previously for those mandatory courses.
Well, they differ.
Who's to invest and who needs to work harder?
Yes, so every so often we run the results off the system and they get sent to the corporate management team. We probably don't do that for all 20, I have to say, you know, just reflecting that probably 20 is too many. Yeah. But courses around cybersecurity, courses around some of the basic manager courses, our Let's Talk About Race course, you know, we would routinely send round completion rates.
Do we know what the directorate completion rates are like?
For each of those courses, we break it down by directorate. Yeah.
Do you have those?
Well, we don't have the whole suite with us today.
Okay.
But if you're interested
it'd be interesting to know which
selection.
Again, I think it's reflective of culture, isn't it?
It is reflective of culture.
If you've got some directorates that are really pushing through and making sure those mandatory courses are completed and completed in time, that leads to follow-up meetings as well, doesn't it? One-to-ones, etc. If, you know, the trouble is sometimes with L&D is you're building these courses just have to be done. People have got an inbox full of this isn't done, this isn't completed, this isn't completed, and you lose the purpose of it because you're overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, for example, we've got a new disability equality course that is a in-person course run by a disabled person. Tim and I, as it happened, were on it together the other day, and that comes with some mandatory pre-course material that you must complete. And you know, the trainer and the supporting team will know who and who hasn't completed that as you're walking into the course. Yeah. So, I mean, personally, I would like to tie in our most important mandatory training into the probation period, and you know, and frankly say, if you haven't completed these, your probation period isn't going to get signed off. But again, we need the systems in place for that to have teeth. But you know, we're now almost there with those systems, and so that's, you know, while at the same time making sure that we only make mandatory what really must be mandatory.
Yeah, and like I say, I agree. I think that probably needs review. So can we take a timestamp today then and just have a look at the completion rates, get them sent over? It'd be interesting to see how it ties in with some of the other factors that we've measured about what the different directorates are doing, turnover, all that sort of stuff.
So yes, but could I suggest we do that for 5 or 6 of the absolute key courses?
Sure.
If there are particular ones you're particularly interested in, let us know.
I know you full well. There's no way you would cherry pick.
I think I know which ones you might be interested in, and we will supply that one as well.
I'm interested in all of them. But,
yeah. I would come back on that, and I think if they're mandatory at the moment, Mary, can we have them all? And if we can't, then clearly there's a reason we're not looking carefully at it, and that informs, I think, enough. The next question as to what's mandatory and what's not.
Yeah, no, fair enough. We can do that. It's not instant to pull them off. That's my only hesitation, but we will prepare that package. Yes. Okay. So they might not all be from today, but if we can chunk them up over, say, a period of a couple of weeks into commission.
Can I apologise to any staff to get frantic emails tomorrow going, finish them?
Right. Well, there'll be a lot watching.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member McCartney.
Yes, because I've done, for example, the Let's Talk About Race, which I found very helpful, and the cybersecurity, where I learnt a lot that I should have known before. But I'm just aware, as Assembly members, we don't regularly get circulated what's there, and we're judged as different. So I think I'm looking, you know, it's not obligatory, but I found it very helpful. So I think it would be useful, actually, to every now and again just remind us about what's on there.
Okay, I'll talk to Helen about that.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up a kind of similar point to my previous comment. For both age and faith recruitment, the report doesn't provide historical data or a comparison, so can we again have that included in future? Yes? Okay. And Mary, perhaps, or Shakira, whoever wants to answer, could you, and this is a question I've asked before, could you again give us the corporate definition that we're using for a diverse panel for recruitment?
So, so we say that it's anybody from a diverse background can be on the panel to represent diversity on the panel. That is corporately what we have said. We haven't deviated from that. It's been in our policy actually for a really long time. We haven't changed the definition of that.
Could you explain what that means then?
Sorry, sorry. Can you repeat that? I'm trying to understand your question. What you mean by that?
So under what does the diverse panel mean when you say from a diverse background? What do you mean?
So someone who's from a Black and Asian ethnic minority representative, someone from who's from a disabled background, someone who is from a diverse background.
Is that it? That's the answer. I'm looking for a full answer on what characteristics we're using. So is it Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, and disabled, and that's it?
Currently.
Okay. So it's not broken down by
or interview panels.
Sexuality, gender identity, or educational background, anything like that. It's simply those two categories.
At the moment, given our focus currently, that is what we have said.
Okay, thanks. Assembly Member.
Sorry, can maybe I understood wrong, but diversity is often a matter of an opinion, so I think you need to have a much more prescriptive or descriptive version of that, because as an outsider, that might make no sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me now, even with your clarification. And you know, so if someone's going to challenge that, it's easy to challenge because it doesn't make particularly sense. So do you feel that something else could be done or said about that?
I think given where we are now in the organisation and given what we know our focus is, and where we know we were looking for actual representation on panels of those two characteristics, that has been our focus. I think that there's something around a conversation further around how we kind of broaden that out, but given that that's our focus, and actually when we were looking at diverse panels and how that is looked at right across the board, we were realising that actually some of our employees weren't even doing that. People were coming to the organisation having all white panels or all male panels, or you know, we were trying to make sure that actually there was some basic standards in place around what we consider diverse panels to demonstrate the kind of need of where we are now as an organisation, given the focus around disability and ethnic minority, Black and Asian ethnic minority. So that has been our corporate line thus far.
I understand it's in your corporate line this far, but once you enter the word diversity, you then have to be diversity. So for instance, if I was from a traveller background, all of what you said means nothing to me. None of those people are diverse because I'm a traveller. You know, my point is, if you're going to do diversity, you're going to have to do diversity. What you've done, and I don't say it's a criticism, but it's what it appears to be to me, is pick diversity as you see it, as this corporate entity sees it. And I wonder, when you tread on this ground, you have to operate not only in the world that you're in, but the world that we're in, and it can be 100 things, 100 different people, and that current definition doesn't describe that in any way at all, and I just feel someone might need to have a look at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So because I'm looking at the stats here, so as somebody that would fall into the 6% of those people that identify apparently as gay or lesbian within the organisation. I wouldn't be sitting on a diversity panel, though.
Well, you might be.
But you just said that it's black and Asian and minority ethnic or disabled.
Yes, but that's not exclusively on our panels. So, and the recruitment panels can be very small. So we can't have every sort of characteristic, protected characteristic, represented on a recruitment panel of possibly 3 or 4 people. So this, I think Shakira's explained it very well from our point of view at the moment. We are trying to make sure that people coming in to be interviewed at the GLA from the backgrounds, from the backgrounds and disabled staff that we are specifically focusing on at the moment in our strategy, come in and feel they are interviewed by people that represent the organisation that they want to join. So it's very targeted at the moment. I mean, the other option is to have, massive panels to try and get much more diversity through there. But we do have white staff, for example, on panels. That's not an exclusive. You don't exclusively have to be black, Asian, and minority, ethnic, or disabled to be on a panel.
My point was, I wouldn't be included as a diverse member of that panel. I wouldn't be diverse.
But you would be very welcome on a panel. Somebody, you or somebody else would be very welcome on that panel as one of the panel members. But this is about making sure that we're not presenting panels of 4 white men or 4 white women to candidates, because that's what used to happen. And that's what we are trying to move away from. We had a discussion at the time. It was, it's a relatively clumsy way of thinking about it. That's, but it's for a particular purpose. And you've seen the impact it's having on our recruitment outcomes. We know we've got more to do. We're always open to refreshing and rethinking. But that's where we are at the moment, and it's worked.
And can I clarify, because the last time we did this last year, we spoke to a member of staff, and I can't remember the figure he gave, but it was something crazy, like almost 80 interviews he'd sat on in like 3 months or something like that. That's not happening anymore, is it?
That was Solomon, who has been fantastic in putting himself forward to sit on interviews. And again, Shakira, you can talk more. We're working very hard to make sure that we do not put burdens on particular people to populate our panels. But you've done some really good work on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree. It can be burdensome, as a black woman, having to sit on lots of panels and be representative in that space. But what we have done across directorates is making sure that actually those who are even not at the grade the role we're going for as a kind of development opportunity. People are going onto panels because we know that we have a spread across grades from those from different ethnic minority, and just making sure that people do come up and that it is not burdensome. We've made sure that we've got kind of people that have nominated themselves to be across directorates, so it's not just directorate set, it's actually working right across the organisation of people understanding different roles and being on panels but using it as a development opportunity and not just static within their directorate, so it's not burdensome for an individual.
Do you have any figures on that, or any numbers? Is there any way we can be absolutely certain that practice isn't happening anymore? Because I think, like you said, from personal experience, that is my concern with this. If you're willing to stick your neck out and say this matters to me, I'll help you out. Well, then you're then burdened with doing all this, which may affect you progressing in your day job.
So I don't collate figures at all, but what I do have is my HR business partners that are kind of embedded within the directorates. They keep a running check of these sorts of things to make sure that it isn't burdensome, and that actually before we were doing quite, as I said, it was quite, narrowly focused across directorates, but we've kind of opened that up now, and actually probably in Tim's area, he'll probably look to good growth or different areas to be able to kind of really spread that, but actually become learning opportunities. It's changed the dynamic somewhat in this space.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I can see any more hands, so I think that concludes our discussion on the workforce report. So I'd like to thank Tim and Shakira for joining us today, and while you're obviously welcome to stick around, you are also more than welcome to leave. But thank you very much for your time today. Can I ask the committee to note the report as background to putting questions to the invited guests, and note the subsequent... Thank you. And can I ask you to delegate authority to the chairman in consultation with the deputy chair and party group leads to agree any output arising from the discussion? Perfect. Thank you. We'll just move on to people's question time. And I think Nicole Valentinuzzi will be joining us shortly. Are we all okay to plough on? Welcome, Nicole. Thank you. Nicole, as many of us probably remember from our last discussion here, is the Assistant Director of External Relations, and she joins Mary for this item. I've had an indication from Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you. I've read the report which came to us, and I'm very pleased to see that it talks extensively about the security considerations after not just the last one in Ealing, which was obviously the worst, but there were issues that happened at the one in Camden where we had to stop the meeting and have some protesters who were in the meeting removed, and they were protesting about something that is literally nothing to do with the mayor or the assembly. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe the mayor is personally responsible upstairs for the rollout of vaccines, and they were anti-vaxxers, and we're certainly not responsible for it here. Well, possibly you might have been, but in a different role. And then we also had a lot of shouting happened at the one in Redbridge as well, and then obviously Ealing transpired as it did. So I'm very pleased to see that attention has been paid to the need to think about the safety for both the mayor and the assembly. What I didn't notice in the report, and it was one of the issues that I think we raised here as the Oversight Committee, and it struck me being particularly in Ealing, was that the staff also were in the same situation as us, of being asked to be at the front of the building, and there was a sort of shared space where we were, and then we came downstairs and had to walk through everybody in the hall, but they were also then left in a situation where they were amongst people. And I would like to hear a little bit more from you about, is the safety of staff going to be taken into consideration? And that means everybody from Mary actually down to the security staff. I would also like to know, because we are actually asking them to take on quite a role now at these events, given that people seem to be expressing their opinions or feelings in quite a more pronounced way for the last 3 meetings. Thank you.
So there is a plan for staff specifically. We haven't considered the executive directors in attendance. We can work that into it, but staff have a separate exit plan once the event has been completed, and the entire event staff that are part of putting on the event have very clear instructions with the security team. They've been involved in the recce, they know the exits, and they all leave the building at different times at the end once it's been cleared. So that is the consideration that's been given at this point.
Okay, but it also needs to take into consideration the safety of the members of staff who might be sitting in the front 2 or 3 rows, because at the last one in Ealing, one of the assembly members started pointing at them and saying, oh, they're the paid-for cheerleaders for the mayor, these are the people, and started pointing them out to other people in the audience, almost to entice them to come to the first few rows and have words to say to them. And I actually felt, and they weren't on the stage with us, that potentially some of the, I think it was a sort of a mixture of deputy mayors and various others who were sitting there. I can't say I conducted an entire survey of who was sitting in the front rows, but they were clearly in the audience in those rows, and there was no obvious means for them to exit from the building from those front row seats. So I think we need to think about the safety of individuals in the front rows, which may include, of course, Mary herself.
Well, I come to every single one of these.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. I think it's relatively simply addressed, isn't it, by making sure those of us in those rows know of the exit requirements, of the exit arrangements, should we feel we need them as well.
Because I really don't want to end up in a situation where any members of staff, any more than the Mayor or the members of the Assembly, are put at risk or have to be escorted to the station, as was spoken about last time, when we ended up with a sort of cordon of police between us and a lot of people who were making a lot of noise outside. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to note the change of language about the words known protagonists have been removed, and I'm really grateful for that. I just think the tone of it wasn't quite right, and this is, obviously it's right that proportionate measures are put in place for security, but the known protagonists and seeking them out seemed a little bit chilling, so I'm very glad to see that. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very fun conversation in our last meeting, and I'm glad that's been taken on board. Assembly Member Bailey.
What conversations are had with the police? Because some of these meetings, it's a polite way of saying it, are excitable. There's a lot of excitement and at some point it does go beyond what would reasonably be the preserve of the security team. So what conversations are had with the police?
So the security team here, the GLA security team, link in with the Met Police throughout the process. So they are aware of the event before it happens. They're in contact throughout if there is anything that comes up. Also, the mayor's protection officers are there as well.
The mayor's protection officers are probably a separate situation.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting, do the police attend? Do they patrol by, knowing that there's huge amounts of people there?
Yes.
And that's formally agreed upon, or is it just local police being efficient?
It's formally agreed upon for the event, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And constantly monitored throughout the event.
Yeah.
They're very, very tight working relationship.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Also, definitely local efficiency as well, I'm sure.
Thanks. Nicole, in our May oversight meeting, apart from talking about known protagonists, we were also talking about the idea of changing the format or topics. A couple of members had raised that in one way or another. Was that explored or discussed?
Yes, so we are currently looking at, so I think I mentioned in the paper that we are looking at the format of the events going forward. We have one more scheduled in Richmond in February, and we will be coming back after that with a proposal for how we could look to change the format of People's Question Time and what that could be going forward. We'll consult, obviously, the Assembly and the Mayor's office at that point.
So continue as usual for Westminster and Richmond, and then at that point I presume you'll talk with group leaders and Bureau and the Mayor. Perfect. Did you, Assembly Member Pigeon?
We talked about this obviously before your time, and a review was supposed to be happening. Why does the February one have to be exactly the same as what's been done as normal? Why can't we come up with something so that we can try it in February?
I just think simply there is a lot of work that's been done right now to focus on the security of the events, and there just hasn't been bandwidth to also look at how we can change the events going forward at this point. The events, the areas have been confirmed, the dates have been confirmed. There was a lot already in place that it wouldn't make sense to unpick ahead of doing a full look at the whole event in the round.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And finally, Nicole, I think we were awaiting a confirmation on whether Assembly members can put leaflets on the seats at People's Question Time.
So as it stands, there are no plans to distribute leaflets at the next People's Question Time. We are looking at the policy around leaflets. To my understanding, no leaflets have been distributed in the past, and there are no plans for that in the future at this point.
So I think this arises because a leaflet was distributed from the Mayor's office, but you're saying no leaflets will be distributed at the next meeting?
Yeah.
From anyone?
On the chairs, yes.
Okay, they will just be fabric chairs and we'll get a clearer policy.
Yes.
Perfect.
Sorry, can we actually get a definite policy statement on that? Because I do think it was, there were leaflets on the chairs at the last one. I don't know if there is a policy or not, and I think the chair is quite right to, it would just be nice to have something written before the next one, not waiting till February, but actually written in something in writing before we go to wherever it is we're going to next, where Tony Devonish is going to be chairing it. Westminster. Sorry, I was having a momentary blankness, and I think the chair is quite right to raise that. I don't think you can expect some people to be allowed to put leaflets out, and then when other people try to put leaflets out, they're told that they can't. There's either none or there's multiple leaflets. Sorry, Chair.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. I look forward to that clarification then. So, sorry, I didn't see any hands, but I'll give it one more look. No. Can I ask the committee to note and provide views on the proposals for People's Question Time and its venue in the London Borough of Westminster on Thursday, 9th of November 2023? And we've provided any views, ideas or suggestions on further ways to improve PQT as a consultative event. So, perfect.
We've been doing that for 2,000 years, Caroline. One day. Will I be gone? Yes, I'll change it.
In that case, can we thank Nicole for her time today? And I'll welcome to stay. I can see you weighing it up, but and we'll just wait for Zoe. And Helen, as well as Zoe. Sorry, Helen. Okay. Onto the London Assembly Work Programme, I'd like to welcome Helen Ewan, Executive Director of the Assembly Secretariat, and Zoe Oliver-Watts, Assistant Director of Scrutiny Investigations, who've also joined Mary for this discussion. I think I had Leonie. Yep, Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. There was a very, very small thing, which is on page 90, where we've got the list of the meeting topics. And for some reason, it appears that the meeting in May of the Environment Committee has been removed. I'm fairly sure that took place because it was on the topic of community energy, and I chaired it. And unfortunately for you, quite a vast number of the people in this room were present at that meeting, including the meeting chair here and my two colleagues who are to my left. Geographically, possibly not politically. Let's not go down that road. But the other thing I wanted to ask about was, although you have got the whole of the work programme here for all of the committees, it doesn't mention a subject which I have raised with both of you, and you know what I'm now going to say, which is what is happening about rapporteurships. Because I personally have a topic in mind. We've had no rapporteurships yet since this term started in 2021. So that's 2 years already. We have 1 year left. So if we want to apply for a rapporteurship, obviously it has to be signed off by the relevant committee and this committee, but you're not mentioning them. When can we all start applying? Because I may not be the only person in that queue.
Thank you, Assembly Member Cooper. Yeah, I apologise for the oversight on the environment thing. We will correct that and we can recirculate if that's useful. I should also say in that context, the Planning and Regeneration Committee programme in particular is provisional, and the group leads will be meeting about it shortly, so that may be subject to change. It's not fully agreed yet. I apologise that was in your papers before it was finally agreed, so we may be providing an update on that if it is changed by the group leads in the next week or so. So I apologise for those two oversights. On rapporteurships, I do appreciate that this is something that's really close to members' hearts, not just yourself, but others have raised this one with me. There's a couple of things. There has been a limit on capacity in the scrutiny team in the past. That is being resolved. We are on our way. We're mid-restructure, and we're definitely on our way towards getting back to full strength. I think there is both a question of capacity, which is being resolved in the next few months, and also a question of how to make the decisions about them. You are not the only person who has raised this with me, so I suspect there is some pent-up appetite for rapporteurships around the parties and among the members, which will have to, which members will want to seek to manage how to distribute them, particularly if they were to restart in this final year, because there wouldn't be a possibility to necessarily get it next time. So it's something that the group leaders have been cited on in terms of a topic for the scrutiny working group, that we can discuss with group leaders potential options for bringing it back and how decisions would be made about who would receive those resources and on what topics. And that's something that I'm hoping to bring to them in the next couple of months. But we wouldn't have an answer until after that as to how it should be done. One thing, if I may make a bid for while I have the microphone, is it would be really good to hear from the experienced Assembly members who were here and present in the last, when they were being done, about exactly how that was done in the past. So I'll be writing a paper just to quickly collect those views, and if I may ask you and perhaps some of your colleagues if I could come and speak to you about how it was done in the past and what you would particularly like to be brought back, so that I can capture those in the papers to group leads. That would be great.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to do that, because I was lucky enough to do a rapporteurship between 2016 and 2021, and I was aware that there'd been the capacity issues, which is why I haven't raised this formally in a meeting until today, and have mainly been just sort of trying to find out what's happening. And certainly one of the things that I've been looking at is something that has a sort of an international element to it, and also may be something that can be facilitated with people from outside of the building giving some elements of support. And I wonder whether that was something that we had thought of, given that we're still talking apparently about gearing up, because I think most of us have noticed that a number of, London University is fantastic and has a huge number of outlets all over the city, and I think they've been reaching out to many of us to there's a clear desire, I think, from their point of view, that they would like to strengthen their involvement in some of our scrutiny, but some of our sort of, forward-thinking processes. Is that something that we can work into your paper as it's being written, the idea that some of the support for what we're doing is more meshed with perhaps international, but certainly university bodies across London?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, and I think Assemblymember Pigeon has also raised that untapped untapped potential for more support from on the academic side. That was the part of the rationale behind when we did the restructure, bringing in, setting aside some placements for secondments in the research unit. It was thought those secondments could potentially support committee work, working group work, but also, yes, potentially rapporteurs. And the idea would be that we could bring someone in with, if a rapporteurship had been identified on a specific topic, we could actively seek an expert on that topic to come and support the process, rather than a staff member getting geared up on it, so to speak, having to do that research themselves. So it's definitely one of the possibilities, and would definitely be part of the paper. And yeah, very keen to speak to you a little bit more about that while I write that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. I guess we have to wonder what you've got planned as an international woman of mystery. But Assemblymember Bailey.
The report notes the need for more community coordination. What specific measures have been done to make this happen?
So On the staff side, there's we ensure that on a weekly basis we're sharing the information about what's happening on committees in any given week or month, and identify those opportunities quite proactively in those meetings. To if someone on environment has done something on water and someone on transport is next doing something on water, to share the information, to share the contacts and things like that. At the more strategic level, I would say that probably comes down to me, to be identifying where there are common options, common causes, where there's opportunities if one committee is doing a visit that would be of interest to another, to identify that and proactively suggest it to the chair. So it's that kind of level of coordination. There is, of course, an opportunity for members to embrace that approach to coordination and for chairs to talk to each other when they see opportunities, and I know that's certainly been identified already with at least 2 committees this term. So there's both the staff level and the political level working there.
Okay. We understand the current policy is being proposed that reports are only written on meetings that are held over 2 investigations. Is there any flexibility that could be offered around that? Because there's a difference between time and impact, isn't there? Some may be one session but be very impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be careful around wording. That would be our advice. Our general advice would be not to do a report for a one-meeting investigation. But you're absolutely right. There will be instances where a single meeting identifies something incredibly important that a topical report could be written on, or a single meeting is done, but there's also a different type of evidence gathering that is very successful. So it's going to be, I think those judgments have to remain ad hoc and in the chairs and group leads' control, but in the context of broader advice, that generally we find the quality that you're looking for in reports to be more available from 2-meeting investigations. So if you absolutely know you want a report, we would normally recommend a 2-meeting investigation. But yeah, it doesn't limit you. If you do one meeting and think there's a fantastic report here, we would certainly not seek to obstruct that.
Okay, and my next question may not please you so much. Can scrutiny's 48-hour rule, the briefings you provide, be revised? Because of course if you're in one of our teams, that gives you a very short lead time. Is it possible to revise that?
Yeah, you're not the first, so please don't worry, it's not an unpopular one. I have enormous sympathy with this point, and I do want to bring forward the briefing timings. The 48-hour deadline has been in place for many years because that's meant to be the hard stop. It won't go lower than this, but it's not meant to be the goal. We'd like to be delivering significantly earlier than that. So, and that's what we're moving towards as we get up to more full capacity. The team have been talking about setting objectives to bring forward to make sure we're reaching a much higher percentage of them getting out at 72 hours in advance, so 3 days in advance. We'll build up to 4. I don't want to be unrealistic and promise something that I can't currently achieve, but I will say that in our objectives this year, whilst we have the absolute hard stop of 48 hours as a minimum, we actually want to, in the vast majority of cases, exceed that to 72 hours.
Okay, and my final question would be, how can we ensure a wider range of guests for any of our committees? I've been on, it's my 2nd term now. I've seen, let's just say, there's familiar faces. How can we go beyond that? Because for all of us, whatever our political stripes, I think that will give us a better level of information. Is there something that can be done that currently isn't being done?
Yeah, I absolutely share that concern, and I think that it's also the topic of quite a lot of team conversations about what we can do at a staff level to provide you with greater options and variety. I'd be very keen to also engage with members if there are things that you feel that we are missing, that there's an opportunity to do.
Biscuits.
There's a couple of...
You could give our guests biscuits and a cup of tea. I think that would go down. It's a good
start. If that would make the difference, we would do it. Absolutely. There are a couple of things that feel slightly indirect but aren't meant to be. For instance, doing calls for evidence in advance of meetings, pulling those forward. So we put out an announcement about what the committee is looking into, ask for people and for organisations to write into the committee with their thoughts, and then receive those in advance of the meeting. What that should mean is that we then read those submissions. They are often coming from organisations you wouldn't expect, or from people that you haven't heard of. And if someone does a great case, there's normally a bigger field from which to choose from if you've also got written submissions in. Not necessarily people you agree with, but someone who has clearly tried to engage, and there's an opportunity to be more open there and have people proactively reaching us. We also, of course, need to be more proactively reaching out. So we are looking at how to develop our staff networks, to enhance our expert networks at each sort of senior policy advisor and policy advisor level, so we become really familiar with the field and can be providing you with more options. And the final thing that's a little bit indirect is pulling the scopes forward. Sorry, did I take your point? Pulling the scopes forward, which is something I reference. We're trying to bring them forward much earlier so they're not butting against the briefing or the meeting coming up, and that will allow members more time to think about people you're suggesting, and will allow us more time to investigate how many people are available. Right, in the last year I have noticed that there's often the usual suspects because there's not enough time to ask others. So bringing all of that forward and hopefully bringing committee agreement forward on the scopes will allow us a bit more time to investigate more options.
Because couldn't we use our work programmes to sort of let us know who we could be writing to long in advance?
Yeah, absolutely.
A call for evidence months before we even get to it.
Exactly.
I think that is it from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I just would add to that point on attracting guests as well as biscuits. If we had that buzzy, purpose-built building that people like to come to in the centre of London, I mean, I don't know. Assembly Member Sahota.
Coming back to the question about getting the right guests right, but I think it's also linked to the fact that getting guests here means that our reports must be more impactful. It will be substantial. Those guests will come here if they feel that our reports will have effect, right, will bring back change, bring back policy changes. And therefore the secret to us must surely be that we must be producing higher quality reports, much more impactful reports, that guests want to come here and give evidence, and when they come here, we treat them well. That's my contribution.
Including biscuits.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, there's a virtuous cycle here as we get more guests, we get more quality reports, and then hopefully that builds and builds, so I couldn't agree more.
Thanks. Assembly Member Bailey, did you want to...
Just a tiny point to add. I think sometimes we need to find a format that's shorter than a report so that the public will absorb the information, because what's probably important to us and our guests is the public hearing what we're talking about, and often a report is, not many people read that when they go to bed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and really keen to experiment with that this year. So particularly if chairs and others have specific ideas for a report that they feel they'd rather not do a narrative report and they'd like to do something else, please do engage. We'd like to bring forward ideas, of course, but if there's something that you're particularly identifying for an infographic, for other types of approach, very keen to try that out this year.
And Chair, just if I may add to that, I mean, I think the comms picture here is really important too, isn't it? And the coming together, you know, the work that Zoe, Kirsty and Rebecca do to bring those project teams together in the crafting of the scope, doing that so much earlier, having that opportunity to think ahead of time of what, you know, what the output options might start to look like, where those more creative options come from, is really positive and quite exciting, but does get so much more impact and benefit if we're doing that work early. So I think the more we can do this year to trial some of that with all of you, the better. And that early scope process will be really critical in helping us achieve that, I think.
Chair, if I can just say, whilst we've got this report before us, I think we should recognise that in this administration and the challenges we face, we've had a pretty difficult time. It's been difficult for us as members, and we know it's been difficult for you in terms of responding to our demands. Those demands aren't going to change. We're going to still be very hard, as we heard some of the pitches earlier on, for rapporteurships, but we should recognise that progress is being made and that we're grateful for that progress, but there are still bits that need just checking up around maintaining the quality, maintaining some of the processes for not just for us around the table, but for people that will be arriving in the next administration, and to get some things that make our life for you and for us a little bit easier in terms of the scrutiny processes that we're involved in. And I think that will mean a better outcome for the residents in terms of accessing some of our work. But I just want to say, I think, and I know it's shared, but thank you for the sort of the challenges that you and your team has faced, and high turnover of people, and we understand that as they get to understand some of the new regimes that we're trying to strive for.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that, Len. I think the committee would probably echo those thanks as well. So, yes, thank you very much, Zoe. Can I ask committee to agree the work programmes for the London Assembly committees? And this one's a long one. In addition to the recommendations set out in the report, can I propose that we also agree a temporary addition to the economy's terms of reference to encompass scrutiny of any actions or decisions of the Mayor in relation to childcare in London in the context of London's economy? This would be a time-limited change for the duration of its current investigation in relation to childcare in London. Scrutiny of the Mayor's actions and decisions on childcare is within this committee's terms of reference, so I'm proposing this temporary change in accordance with Standing Order 11.4 and following discussion with the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Economy Committee to provide clarity about the Economy Committee's remit to scrutinise this important cross-cutting issue.
Agreed. Sorry, could you repeat that?
Thank you. And with that, I think I will thank Zoe and Helen for their time today and offer them the option to stay. It is a popular choice. But oh, you are? I thought it was just Simon, sorry. Oh, I offered you the opportunity to go, actually. So I think we're going to have, I think we discussed in our pre-meet where this discussion might go, but can I just make sure no one on the committee is intending to talk about the items in the redacted part of Appendix 1? Please don't do that, because otherwise we have to do an exclusion. Thanks. Assembly Member Deval.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I begin by an apology, because I've not given Mary and her team a heads up about that we probably wish to defer this item. There are urgency procedures that we can deal with it fairly quickly following this, but there's an aspect, particularly in the report, that we don't think that we've dealt with privately enough. And thank you for the briefings that have been provided to date. So, Chair, what I think we would like to do is defer this item. We'll use the emergency procedures that we've got. We won't wait until September for our next meeting to give you back our views on it. But we definitely want to explore one or two items that's contained in the report, which we're grateful for. It's a lengthy report, and we will give it a proper, thorough conversation privately with you before we give our formal views.
Thank you, Assembly Member Duval. Chair, if it's helpful, and we welcome that, happy to take forward those conversations and provide any other clarity that we can. We can move quickly on that. I think, as you know, the kind of appetite from our side was to take this forward so that the staff consultation could be done in detail and in earnest. So really grateful for the opportunity to deal with that outside of the meeting and rather than come back in September. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry, I should have welcomed you, Simon, into the chamber to be told that as well, so thank you, and apologies again. So with that, can I ask...
Do we not want to say a few of the general areas we've got concerned? Or just say, no, you don't want to at this point?
I think it will formally be reported back in September for transfer. Sorry, I think it will be reported back in September, any response that we do. We will do a formal response, but using the decision-making process that's about to be undertaken that we can do for that period. And we, of course, through the chair and the 4 group leads, we will have further conversations with the officers.
Yeah, I agreed. So with that, can I ask committee to defer the report on the proposed restructure of the sorry, that's written poorly. Sorry, Paul. Sorry, defer the report on the proposed restructure for the facility management unit. Agreed. And okay, and we will respond using emergency procedures and in consultation with group leads and party and the deputy chair to the consultation on the proposed restructure of the facilities management unit. Perfect. Okay, thank you, and thanks very much, Simon, Helen, and Mary. And you really can leave now, Helen.
And stay to the bitter end.
Okay. Can I ask the committee, moving on to the Oversight Committee work plan, can I ask the committee to note its work programme for 23-24? And the date of the next meeting will be the Thursday, the 28th of September at 2 in the Chamber City Hall. And I have no any other items that I consider urgent, so we will close the meeting with 20 minutes to 5. Sorry. It said it twice.
Yeah.